I never thought the two people I loved the most would plan to take everything I built behind my back. My name is Laura Bennett, and for 16 years, I've been both mother and father to my daughter Emma. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and smiled through nights I wanted to cry. But nothing prepared me for the day I found out she was helping him, the man who walked out on us to take the only home we ever had. But what they didn't know is that I had a secret of my own. And when I revealed it, their world fell apart. People always say being a single mom makes you stronger, but they never talk about the nights you cry quietly so your child won't hear. My name is Laura Bennett, and this is the story of how I built a life from nothing, only to watch it almost burn down by the hands of the two people I loved the most. When Mark left, Emma was barely 3. I still remember that morning he packed a suitcase, kissed her forehead, and said he'd come back when things were better. He never did. I waited. For months, then years. But the phone stopped ringing. The mailbox stopped filling. The man I thought I'd grow old with disappeared into thin air. I was 26, broke and terrified. We had no savings, no car, and a house that needed more repairs than love could fix. But I made myself a promise that day Emma would never feel abandoned. So I picked up 2 jobs, mornings at a diner, nights cleaning offices. Every night I'd come home, tiptoe into her room, and watch her sleep. She'd curl up with that tiny stuffed bear, the one her father gave her before he left, and I'd whisper, "Mommy's here, baby. Mommy's got you." That became my prayer, my rhythm, my life. The years passed like pages in a book nobody asked to read. Some days were good, Emma's first day at school, the first time I could afford a real Christmas tree, the first night we ate dinner without worrying about rent. Other days were just survival. There were moments I couldn't afford milk. Days I'd go to bed hungry just so she'd have lunch for school. I'd tell her I wasn't hungry, but really, I was starving. And when she'd fall asleep on my lap, I'd cry quietly into her hair, not from sadness, but from exhaustion mixed with love. I became the plumber, the mechanic, the tutor, the nurse, and the comforter, all rolled into one woman who refused to quit. But even with all that, I never complained, because every time I saw her smile, I thought it's worth it. Emma grew up fast. She was smart too, smart sometimes. By the time she was 13, she'd learned to cook, to budget, to understand bills. She'd help me with the grocery list, making sure we didn't buy anything we didn't need. We weren't just mother and daughter, we were partners in survival. We'd watch TV together on Friday nights, make popcorn, laugh at cheap commercials. She'd braid my hair while telling me stories about her friends. I used to look at her and think, she's everything I ever wanted to be. She didn't have fancy clothes or new phones or expensive vacations, but she had a heart, a soft, beautiful heart. Or so I thought. When Emma turned 16, she started asking questions. About her father, about the past I'd tried so hard to bury. "Mom, what really happened between you and Dad? Why did he leave? Do you ever talk to him?" I'd smile, pretending I was busy folding laundry, and say, "Sweetheart, some doors are better left closed." But she kept asking. Then she started searching, digging through old boxes, asking my sister questions, finding photos I'd hidden. One night she found an old letter, one I never meant for her to see. It was a note from Mark, written years ago. "Laura, you can have the house if you can make the payments. I just want out." That single line, that careless promise, became a storm. She started seeing him differently, not as the man who left, but as a man who maybe made a mistake. A man who could be forgiven. And I could feel it. that invisible wall growing between us. The wall built by curiosity, by teenage hope, by the lies he once told. It was a Friday. I'd just come home from work, smelling like grease and coffee, my hands aching. Emma was sitting on the porch, her phone in her hand, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated. "Just a friend," she said, her voice too soft, too careful. That night, she didn't eat dinner. She locked her room. And I knew something was happening. The next week, I found a text on the kitchen counter, a message notification glowing on her phone before it went dark. "Proud of you, Em. You're doing great. We'll get what's rightfully ours soon. Dad." My heart froze. Ours? What did he mean, ours? I didn't confront her that night. I just sat in the living room, staring at the old family photo, the one where Mark had his arm around me, smiling like a man who'd never lie. That's when I realized the past I'd buried wasn't dead. It was just waiting to come back and destroy everything I'd built. Over the next few weeks, Emma became distant. She'd whisper on the phone, "Leave the house early. Come back late." Her laughter changed. It wasn't innocent anymore. It was secretive. She stopped helping with bills, started questioning my choices. One night, when I told her we couldn't afford a new laptop, she snapped, "Maybe if you hadn't spent your whole life working small jobs, we wouldn't live like this." I felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. This was my daughter, my little girl, and she was starting to sound like him. I didn't yell. I just said, "You'll understand one day, Emma. You'll understand when love isn't enough to pay the bills." She rolled her eyes, grabbed her jacket, and slammed the door. The sound echoed through the empty house, the same house I had held together with late payments, patched walls, and pure willpower. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the bills scattered across the table, the old deed papers, the mortgage statements. My mind replayed every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every single thing I'd done to keep a roof over our heads. And then one single thought hit me like lightning. What if he's after the house? The house wasn't just property. It was my life every hour, every tear, every dream. If Mark had found a legal loophole, and if Emma was helping him, I'd lose everything. But what neither of them knew was that I'd been keeping one secret from the very beginning. A secret that could burn their entire plan to ashes. And that is where the game began. You can survive being left. You can survive being broke. But surviving betrayal, especially from your own child, that's a different kind of pain. And when I learned the truth, I didn't cry. I planned. I didn't see it coming. Not that day, not that way. It was a Tuesday morning. I was rushing to get to work when I heard a car stop outside the house. I peeked through the window and froze. Mark. 16 years had passed since the last time I saw that man. He looked older, but not weaker like someone who had aged comfortably. His hair was shorter, his clothes expensive, his shoes polished. He got out of the car and smiled like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Hey, Laura," he said, voice steady, calm. "You look good." I wanted to slam the door, but before I could say a word, Emma came running down the stairs. She didn't look surprised. She looked ready. "Dad!" she shouted. And that was the moment I knew they'd already been in touch. I stood there, frozen between them, watching my daughter hug the man who'd broken me into pieces. He held her tight, whispering something in her ear, and she smiled like she'd just found a piece of her life that had been missing all along. It tore something inside me. When she finally turned to me, her voice was full of light I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I invited him over. He wants to talk. Can we just listen?" No, I didn't want to listen. But I did. Because sometimes silence keeps the peace longer than truth ever could. He came inside like he still belonged here, looked around, complimented the walls I had painted, the floors I had repaired, the curtains I had sewn by hand. "You kept the place up well," he said, with that smirk that used to make me melt. Now it just made me sick. Emma sat beside him, glowing. I stood across, arms folded. "What do you want, Mark?" "To make things right," he said easily. "I've been clean for years, got a steady job, some savings. I thought maybe I could help out, be a father again." I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "You think you can just walk back in here like none of it happened?" He looked at me, then at Emma. "Laura, people change. You did a great job raising her. I'm proud of you, but she deserves to know her father too." Proud of me? That word felt like a slap. Where were you when she had nightmares, Mark? When I worked doubles and couldn't buy her new shoes? When she asked why her daddy didn't call on Christmas? But Emma was watching, her eyes filled with hope. I couldn't crush it, not yet, so I said nothing. I just nodded stiffly and let him stay for coffee. It was the longest 15 minutes of my life. After that day, he started visiting more often. Sometimes, when I wasn't home, I'd come back to find his car parked outside or see Emma sitting on the porch, waiting for him. She started dressing differently, acting differently. She was lighter, happier, but not with me. Her smiles were his now. Her trust, too. One evening I found her at the table with papers spread out, property documents, bank statements, old letters. My chest tightened. "What are you doing with those?" I asked. She jumped a little. "Oh, Dad was just helping me understand the house situation. He says maybe we can fix some of the ownership stuff." Ownership. That word. "Emma," I said slowly, "you don't need to worry about any of that. The house is secure." "He says it's not, Mom," she snapped back. "He says legally, it's still in his name. You never finished the transfer." Her tone sharp, accusing didn't sound like her. It sounded like him. "He's lying," I said quietly. "Why would he lie? He's trying to help us." Us. It was like watching my daughter drift away on a boat I couldn't pull back to shore. She stood up, clutching the papers to her chest. "You've kept me in the dark my whole life. Maybe Dad isn't the villain here." And just like that, she walked out. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. The house felt colder than ever. I stared at the coffee mug still sitting on the counter from his last visit. Everywhere I looked, I could feel him creeping back into my world through her words, her smile, her belief in him. He was smart. He knew exactly how to reach me by reaching her first. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. I'd find envelopes with his return address, papers marked with legal stamps, letters about property rights and reinstatement of ownership. He wasn't just trying to come back. He was trying to take what I had built after he left, and my daughter was his messenger. I confronted him one afternoon in front of the house. He was sitting in his car, engine idling, sunglasses on, pretending he belonged in this neighborhood. "You need to stop coming here," I said firmly. "Why? I'm not doing anything wrong," he said with that fake innocence. "You're filling her head with lies. I'm telling her the truth. You should have done that a long time ago." I could feel my blood boil. "The truth? The truth is you left. You gave up your rights the day you walked away. You didn't finish the paperwork, Laura. The deed's still under my name. You know what that means." He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and that's when I knew this wasn't about fatherhood. This was about control. "You can't take this house," I said quietly. "Watch me," he replied, and rolled up his window. The next week, I got the notice. A legal petition for property claim, filed under his name with Emma listed as supporting witness. My hands shook as I read it. The house I had poured my life into, the one place that was mine, was now the center of a war I never asked for. When I showed it to Emma, she avoided my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "Dad said it's just legal stuff. It doesn't mean he's taking it from us. He just wants it fair." "Fair?" I said. "What's fair about trying to take everything I worked for?" She didn't answer. She just turned away. That night, I heard her crying in her room. I wanted to go in, hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't, because I didn't know if it would be. For the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never felt toward my daughter before. Fear. Not of losing her, but of what she might become if she kept following him. The court date came fast. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, because that's what it felt like, the death of everything I'd built. Mark sat at the front with his lawyer, confident and polished. Emma sat beside him, eyes red, hands trembling. He didn't look at me once, not when the judge called his name, not when I took my seat across from him. They presented their case: incomplete ownership transfer, marital asset rights, intent to reclaim property. Every word was like a stab in the chest. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer stood up. But I stopped him. "No," I said. "Let me speak for myself." I looked straight at Mark, then at Emma. "You think I'm scared of losing this house?" I said, my voice shaking but loud. "This house isn't just walls and wood. It's the place where I held my daughter through nightmares, where I built a life out of nothing while you were out living yours. You think you can take it because your name's on a piece of paper? You'll see, Mark. You'll see what you really signed away years ago." He looked puzzled for a second, then nervous, because he didn't know what I knew. And that secret, the one I'd kept hidden all those years, was the one thing that would destroy his plan completely. I walked out of that courtroom.com. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. Emma followed me outside, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought—" "You thought he cared," I interrupted softly. "I did too, once." End quote. End quote. She cried harder, trying to explain, but I didn't need her to. I already knew how easily a kind heart can be twisted by the right words. So I hugged her and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I've got it handled." She didn't know what I meant then, but she would soon. Because when the next hearing came, everything, every lie, every scheme, every signature was about to collapse right in front of him. When betrayal comes from a stranger, you recover. When it comes from your own child, it cuts straight through the soul. I used to think I was unbreakable, but the day I saw what my daughter had done, the day I realized she had been working against me, something inside me shattered quietly. It started with an envelope. I found it on the kitchen table one morning, sealed, with my name scribbled in Emma's handwriting. At first, I thought it was an apology. Maybe she was finally realizing what she'd done. But inside wasn't a letter. It was a copy of a legal document, her signature, right beside her father's. A witness affidavit confirming that Mark had continued financial interest in the house. That document was the missing piece he needed to win, and my daughter had given it to him. I just stood there, the paper trembling in my hand. My chest felt tight. I couldn't even breathe properly. When she came home later, humming a song like nothing was wrong, I asked quietly, "Emma, what's this?" Her face froze. For a split second, I saw fear. Then, defiance. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Dad said it's to protect me too." "Protect you?" I repeated. "By helping him take the roof over your head?" She frowned. "You're making it sound worse than it is. He just wants what's fair." That word again, fair. I placed the papers on the counter between us. "Fair is what I've been doing for 16 years, Emma. working double shifts so you could have a life, fixing this house when it was falling apart, paying bills that your father never cared to touch. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look sorry. She looked angry. "You lied to me," she screamed suddenly. "You told me he left because he didn't care. But he said you pushed him away. He said you took everything from him, even me." The room went silent. I stared at her, my hands trembling. "He said what?" "He said you ruined his life, that you took the house in the divorce when he was broke, that you never let him come back." She was crying now, but her words were sharp, rehearsed like he had fed them to her word for word. "And you believed him?" I asked softly. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she shouted. For a moment, neither of us moved. The clock ticked loudly in the corner. I looked at my daughter, my baby, and realized she didn't see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as the villain in her father's story. And in that moment, I understood. Mark hadn't just stolen my house. He'd stolen my daughter's trust. The following weeks were a blur. We barely spoke. She stayed in her room most days, texting, whispering on calls, sneaking out. The laughter that once filled the house was gone, replaced by silence so heavy it almost made me choke. Sometimes I'd stand outside her door, listening. I could hear her crying, and I wanted to go in, to hold her, to tell her she was being used. But every time I tried, she pushed me away. "Just leave me alone, Mom. I'm tired of your drama." It was like living with a stranger. Then one afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer. "Laura," he said carefully, "I just received a new submission from Mark's attorney. It includes an updated witness statement." From Emma. My blood ran cold. "Another one?" "Yes. It strengthens his case significantly. I'm sorry to say, but if this goes to final judgment, you could lose the house." I hung up without saying a word. That evening, I waited for her. When she came home, she looked tired, eyes red from crying. "We need to talk," I said. "Mom, not now." "Now," I insisted. She dropped her bag, crossed her arms, and looked at me like I was a stranger. "What?" "You filed another statement." Her jaw clenched. "Dad said it would help the judge understand." "Understand what?" "That your mother doesn't deserve the home she built with her own hands?" She didn't answer. "Emma, do you know what you're doing? If he wins, we lose everything. You lose everything." Her voice broke then. "I'm just tired, Mom. Tired of being caught between you two. He said he'd give me the house one day if I helped. He said it could be mine." I stared at her. The betrayal wasn't just painful, it was unbelievable. "He promised you my house?" I whispered. "Our house," she corrected softly. Something inside me went quiet then. Not angry, not sad, just still. That was the moment I knew I couldn't reach her anymore, not with words, not with love. So I decided to let her walk her path. Because sometimes, the only way someone learns who's lying is when the truth burns everything around them. The day before the final court hearing, she came into my room. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She sat at the edge of the bed and said, "Mom, if he wins, will you hate me?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I'll never hate you, Emma. But one day, you'll realize who really fought for you and who just used you to fight his battles." She wiped her tears and left, and I sat there in the dark, knowing exactly what I had to do. Because I wasn't going to fight them with anger. I was going to fight them with truth. The kind of truth that destroys lies in seconds. The kind that had been sitting quietly in a locked drawer in my bedroom for 16 years. The next morning, I took out the old brown envelope. Inside were the documents I had saved from the divorce original papers Mark never bothered to read before signing. Among them was the key, a trust deed I had created after he left. It stated that the property was transferred to a private trust for Emma, but with one condition. She could not claim ownership until after my death. Until then, I had full and exclusive rights. And Mark? He had signed the release himself all those years ago, without even realizing what it meant. He thought he was just signing away the mortgage responsibilities. In reality, he had signed away the ownership. That was my secret, my silent revenge, written in ink 16 years ago. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months, because I knew tomorrow would end everything, his lies, his control, his arrogance, and maybe, just maybe, it would open my daughter's eyes to the truth. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. But if peace had to come through a storm, I was ready to face it head on. The courtroom was colder that day. Maybe it was just me. Or maybe it was the tension sitting heavy in the air. I sat quietly on the wooden bench, my hands folded in my lap, a calm I hadn't felt in months spreading through my chest. Across the room, Mark looked confident, too confident. He was wearing that same smug grin he used to wear when he thought he'd won an argument before it even started. And beside him sat Emma, eyes red, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the strap of her bag. I wanted to look at her, to reassure her somehow, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because today wasn't about comfort. Today was about truth. The judge entered, papers shuffled, lawyers stood. The whole thing felt distant, like a movie I'd already seen before. Mark's lawyer started speaking first, his voice slick and practiced. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Mark Bennett, is here simply to reclaim legal ownership of property that remains, on paper, under his name. My client acknowledges his absence from the residence for several years, but believes that I stopped listening. I'd heard every version of that speech before, all dressed in legal words meant to make abandonment sound like a business decision. When it was my turn, my lawyer stood up, but I placed my hand on his arm. I'll handle this, I whispered. The judge nodded. Mrs. Bennett, you may proceed. I stood, the room suddenly feeling too quiet. Every eye on me, Mark's smirk, Emma's guilt, the lawyer's annoyance. Your Honor, I began slowly, I've listened to a lot of talk about ownership today, about who deserves what and who signed which paper. But let me tell you something they haven't said. This house isn't a piece of property. It's a life. I looked at Mark. He shifted slightly, maybe realizing I wasn't there to play defense. When my husband left 16 years ago, he didn't just walk away from a house. He walked away from his family. He left no support, no help, no communication. I raised our daughter alone, paid off debts he created, and kept that house standing when everyone told me to sell it. I turned to the judge. He claims ownership because his name was never removed. But there's something important he forgot. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. My fingers didn't shake, not even a little. Inside this envelope, I continued, is the original trust agreement, signed and notarized 16 years ago by him. It states that this property was placed into a trust for our daughter, Emma Bennett. But that trust includes one clear clause. She cannot claim ownership or make changes to the deed while I am alive. Until then, all rights remain with me. I handed the envelope to the court clerk. The moment the judge opened it, the silence became electric. Pages turned. The lawyer leaned forward, squinting. Mark's face began to lose its color. Mrs. Bennett, the judge said after a pause, are you saying this document was created by mutual consent during your divorce? Yes, Your Honor. He signed it, voluntarily. The notary and witness signatures are on page 3. The judge read for another few seconds, then looked up sharply. Mr. Bennett, this document directly contradicts your claim. Mark's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering fast. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the table. "That can't be real," he muttered. "Oh, it's real," I said calmly. "And it's legally binding. I kept a copy safe all these years because I knew the day might come when you'd try to take what you abandoned." Emma looked between us, confusion and shock flickering across her face. "Dad, is that true?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. "Dad?" she said louder. "You signed this?" He still said nothing, his eyes darting to the judge, then back to the paper. It was the first time I'd ever seen him speechless. The judge finally broke the silence. "Based on this evidence, the court acknowledges that the property in question was legally transferred into a trust 16 years ago, and Mr. Bennett relinquished all ownership rights at that time. The case is dismissed." Dismissed. One word, just one word, and 16 years of fear, struggle, and heartbreak collapsed into quiet relief. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. It was over. Mark stood up suddenly, his voice shaking with anger. "You tricked me, Laura. You knew I didn't read those papers. You had a lawyer," I replied, meeting his eyes. "You chose not to care. That's not a trick. That's negligence." He glared at me, but there was nothing left to say. The law had spoken. The game was over. When we stepped outside, the sunlight hid differently. Warmer, softer, cleaner. Emma followed me, quiet and pale. She didn't look at her father. He called her name once, twice, but she didn't turn around. Finally, she whispered, "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I looked at her, really looked at the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms, now standing there, older, lost, broken. "I know, baby," I said softly. "You just wanted to believe the best in him. That's what makes you good. But sometimes good hearts get used by people who never learned what love really means." Her tears started again, and this time I pulled her into my arms. She sobbed into my shoulder, whispering apologies over and over. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "It's okay," I said. "You just learned the hardest lesson a person can learn, that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Just A." She nodded against me, and right there, outside that courthouse, I forgave her. Because I knew she was already punishing herself more than I ever could. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma finally asked, "Why didn't you tell me about the trust, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "Because it wasn't about the papers, sweetheart. It was about teaching you strength. I wanted you to know that no matter what anyone tries to take, you can always rebuild. But now you also know that I never needed to rebuild. I just needed to wait." She wiped her eyes. "You're stronger than I ever knew." "No," I said. "I just learned how to fight smart." Inside the house, the walls still smelled like coffee and paint. It didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like victory, quiet, steady, deserved. A few days later, I heard that Mark had left town again. No goodbye, no apology, just gone. And honestly, I was fine with that. Because for the first time in 16 years, he couldn't touch me. Not legally, not emotionally, not even through our daughter. He had played his final card, but I had held the ace all along. It's been 6 months since that day in court. The house feels different now, quieter, but also lighter. No more lawyer calls, no more letters in the mail, no more sleepless nights wondering what could be taken from me next. The silence finally feels like peace. Sometimes I walk through the living room with a cup of coffee in my hand and just breathe. I see the same old furniture, the same faded curtains, the same floor I once scrubbed until my knees hurt, but now it feels like mine, truly mine. Not just legally, Emotionally, Emma still lives with me for now. She's finishing college online, working part-time, saving up to get her own apartment someday. We don't talk about her father much anymore, but every now and then, she'll ask questions not out of anger, just curiosity, like the other night, when she sat at the kitchen table, stirring her tea long after it had gone cold. "Mom," she said softly, "do you ever miss him?" I smiled faintly, setting my cup down. "Miss him? No, but I do remember him." She tilted her head. "What's the difference?" I looked out the window for a second before answering. Missing someone means you want them back. Remembering them means you've accepted what they taught you, even if it hurt. She nodded slowly, and I could see it, the understanding settling in her eyes. It's the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or college. It comes from surviving. There was a time when I thought betrayal was the end of love. But now I see it differently. Betrayal doesn't end love, it ends illusions. When Mark left, I thought the worst pain was being abandoned. When I found out Emma had been helping him, I thought that pain couldn't get any worse. But the truth is, it did, because betrayal from someone you raised cuts deeper than any heartbreak ever could. Yet that pain changed me. It sharpened me. It made me pay attention, not to what people say, but to what they do when no one's watching. And most importantly, it taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Not this time." One afternoon, Emma came into my room holding a box. It was old, worn out, dusty, the same one I kept under my bed for years. "What's this?" she asked. I smiled. "That's the box where I kept everything from the past. His letters, our pictures, a few papers I couldn't throw away." She hesitated. "Do you want me to get rid of it?" I shook my head. "No. Let's open it together." We sat on the floor, side by side, as I lifted the lid. There were wedding photos, a few notes in his handwriting, even Emma's baby hospital bracelet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said quietly, "You know, I used to open this box whenever I felt weak. I'd look at these pictures and wonder what I did wrong." Emma's eyes softened. "And now?" I smiled. "Now I open it to remind myself what I survived." We burned the papers that night, not out of hate, but out of release. The flames danced, warm and bright, and I swear I could feel the past finally letting go of me. In the weeks that followed, something inside me shifted. I started doing small things for myself, things I'd forgotten I loved. Morning walks, painting, reading on the porch until sunset. And one morning, while sipping my coffee, I caught my reflection in the window, older, stronger, softer somehow. That's when it hit me. I didn't just win in court, I won in life. Because revenge isn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply living well, without bitterness, without fear, without needing anyone to validate your worth. Emma and I are closer now. The trust that cracked between us didn't vanish, it rebuilt, stronger than before. Built on truth this time, not secrets. Every night, before she goes to bed, she says, "Good night, Mom. I love you." And I always answer, "I love you more." Because despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, love still won. Not the kind that depends on someone else's loyalty, but the kind that comes from within. Last week, I got a letter in the mail from the bank. It said the mortgage on the house was fully paid off. My name, only my name. I held that letter in my hands and laughed through tears. It felt like closing a chapter that took 16 years to finish. If you ask me what I learned from all this, I'd tell you 3 simple truths. 1. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We may not shout, but we prepare. 2. Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your fight. Sometimes, even the ones who hurt you can find their way back if you leave the door open just wide enough for redemption. 3. And finally, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. The day I forgave both of them, I stopped being a victim. I became my own hero. Now, when I look at my house, the same walls that once echoed with arguments and silence, I see something else. I see survival. I see a woman who was underestimated, betrayed, and pushed to her limits but never broken. I see me. And for the first time in years, I whisper to myself with a smile, "You did it, Laura. You won." Then I close my eyes, take a deep breath, and let peace finally fill the space where pain used to live. If this story touched your heart or gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these true emotions alive. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story that might just change the way you see life.